Let's get started. Hello and welcome. Thanks for taking the time to join us today. I'm Gar Whaley. I'm one of the co-founders of Aligned Technology Solutions based here in Washington, D.C. Of course, with me, I have our Vice President of Cybersecurity and Compliance, Justin Weeks. Among his other 100 or so certifications, Justin is a CMMC registered practitioner as well as a CMMC assessor for level 2. Justin, how are you today?
I'm great, Gar. Thanks for asking. And I'm going to be a little honest here. I'm trying to figure out what you dragged me into. So what are we going to be talking about today?
Well, Justin, today we are going to talk for 10 minutes or less, and I have my little timer right here on some of the changes and updates to the CMMC timeline. Let's start. We did a big blog about 2 weeks ago. There was a big announcement. Why don't we start by talking a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So there certainly was an announcement, and this is good news for all those of us in the CMMC ecosystem. So for those of you just joining us, Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, also known as CMMC, um, is a big DoD program, as you may know. But the biggest update here is there's a proposed rule that has been shipped over to OIRA, which is the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs. And that rule is now currently under review.
What's the significance of that?
Well, we have a big government. Our government does a lot of different things for a lot of different people that they serve. And there's a lot of rules, a lot of regulations, a lot of laws, a lot of government-wide policies. And if you make a new program or you change something in the existing program, there's a lot of checks and balances that have to take place to review these. Everything from the cost that's going to happen. They want to make sure that the well-functioning system doesn't come crumbling in on top of itself because somebody didn't have the foresight to think about a number of things. And that's what OIRA is doing right now. They're reviewing that rule. Now, as far as the significance of that rule, it's really just kind of confirming what we already know, that DoD considers this very, very serious, and that they really want to be able to put assessors out there to assess your environment to make sure you're complying with all of your obligations. Now, you're already supposed to comply with these obligations. So this is really just being able to perform this at scale instead of having DIDCAT come in and do individual assessments on organizations. They can now use third-party assessors who can go into your environment and assess you.
I don't know why, Justin. The reason I smiled when I asked what the significance is because OIRA is a bit of a tongue twister for me. I don't know why I can't get that out. So anyway, what is the timeline change because of this? How did the timeline change because it went to OIRA?
So the short answer is I really don't see how the timeline has changed at all, to be quite frank here, at least not in an appreciable sense. So let's go back all the way to 2020. Around 2020, we had the CMMC 1.0. Most public information around that time, DoD was saying, hey, we fully expect the DoD program to be 100% implemented, somewhere around fiscal year 2026. They were going to take a crawl, walk, run approach. So the idea was that, hey, we're going to announce the program. Some of the contracts are going to have some language over time. And eventually we're going to phase that into 100% of the contract. So keep that date in mind, that fiscal year 2026. Now, they didn't say if it was going to be by fiscal year 2026 or during fiscal year 2026, but to me, that's irrelevant. You can all make your decision for those who are listening. Anyway, after that, somewhere around a year later, November 2021, DoD came in and released a new CMMC 2.0 program. I remember everybody was, freaking out about that. What does that mean? In fact, they actually removed some items, but really didn't. That's a whole other video we can talk about.
It seems like that was just yesterday.
It does seem like it was just yesterday. At that time, though, what was very important, they did say rulemaking would take 9 to 24 months. So remember, November 2021, if you take that 24-month, the longer part of that period, that brings us to November 2023. And everything seems to be timed with OIRA right now for release in September 2023. So they are either exactly on time or a little bit early, depending upon how you feel about those estimates. Now, Justin, that still doesn't mean what's going on with this 2026 thing that you said. Well, let's dig a little bit further. Sometime around 2022 during CMMC Day, there were other public comments made that to expect everything, the CMMC compliance in all contracts by October 1st, 2025. So that would indicate that they're trying to achieve this before fiscal year 2026, and that's their deadline. So if you take that, they're actually ahead very much so, of everything that they have said as far as the CMMC timeline is concerned. Now, regardless of this going to IR, the most important thing that everybody really needs to understand here is that you likely already have obligations under DFARS 252, 204, 7012, 7019, and 7020. Additionally, DIPCAT can come into your environment at any time and perform an assessment on you. So none of those things have actually changed. The only thing that has changed is the new rule allows the DoD to perform these assessments at scale using independent third-party assessors to perform that on organizations.
Understood. Understood. So where should OSCs be at this point? In other words, if I'm responsible for CMMC at my organization, what should I have done already or at least be working on?
So if you've done nothing already, first of all, you're too late, and you'll hear us maybe say that a couple more times, but you really need to get all of your contracts together, and you have to identify which ones are for DoD and which ones that you may be receiving CUI from. And there's a number of contract language things you can look for, but really it's going to come back to the D4 7020, 7019, and 7012. There's others as well. Due to time, we can't talk about all of them, but really identify.
That's enough numbers for today.
Correct. That's enough numbers for today. The second thing you want to do with that information, though, is you want to see which contracts are actually providing you CUI. Because just because the language is in there doesn't mean you're actually receiving CUI. So identify what CUI you're receiving. And once you can identify that, you really want to see how it comes into your organization, where you store it in your organization, and how you transmit it and process that information in some fashion. And once you know that, you can create something called a data flow diagram. So you can see all the wonderful places that your data is going, and DoD's data. So I mistakenly said your data. Remember, this is government data. It is not your data. You're in possession of it for them. Now, when you get to that point, you're going to see all these devices. And what you're going to do is draw something called a boundary diagram in your environment. And that's really going to tell you that, hey, it's only on these systems, and there's a bunch of other stuff that touches these systems that either store, transmit, or process CUI. When you've reached that point, you are at a very, very good place because you should be able to produce some answers. How much DoD business do I have? How much CUI am I receiving from this DoD business? And do I have a business case strong enough to justify the expense of engaging into CMMC? That's because you're going to know the contract value and the value of those contracts, and you can get a good estimate of what it's going to cost to become CMMC compliant. When you reach that point, the next things you're going to want to do with that boundary in mind is determine if you want to do your full company or if you want to do a secure enclave and draw a boundary diagram. And that's very important because your boundary indicates what you're supposed to be protecting. Everything within inside that boundary is supposed to be protected, specifically CUI in this case, because we're talking about CMMC, or FCI if we're talking about level 1, of course. But with that, do a mini assessment of everything that's at the border of that boundary and inside that boundary. And what you're going to want to do is create 2 documents. On top of your boundary diagram and your data flow diagram is you're going to want a system security plan and something called a POAM, which is a plan of action and milestones. The system security plan describes that environment that we were talking about. And the plan of action and milestones indicates what you have accomplished in CMMC or NIST 800-170-1 and what you haven't. At that point, it's as simple as going down that checklist and knocking them all down.
Great. Hey, Justin, I'm sitting here as you're going through this, and there's a number of questions that have come in. This is like almost a whole topic on itself. So we'll follow up maybe with another webinar or a blog on this, just so we can stick to our time commitment. Luke, one of our technology advisors for the last couple of weeks, has been hearing a lot about variances or class variances. Can OSCs push their deadline due to a class variance?
So that's a great question. And listen, I'm not a representative of DoD. I have no inside information and that would be able to share this. But if I had to take out, a dirty, dusty, unclean crystal ball that probably needs lots of Windex that we haven't used yet, I do, in fact, believe there is going to be some type of class variance, but maybe not in a way that most people expected. So let's look at the totality of the situation here. Is that roughly you probably have had obligations since around 2017 to comply with a lot of these regulations. So if DoD hasn't given you a class variance today since 2017, why would they be incentivized to give you one today? You've already been being awarded contracts and you've said that you're going to comply with these. I would probably more expect a False Claims Act type of situation from the Department of Justice than really coming into a situation where they would give you a variance. I do expect a potential variance, though, is that there is NIST 800-171 revisions going on. There is a new revision, and we are operating under what is the current but going to be old revision by the time the CMMC program is fully implemented. And a lot of the supporting documents state that you're going to be following NIST 800-171 absent of revision. So I would expect DoD to do a class variance between the things that may have changed in the old revision of NIST 800-171 and the current proposed revision of NIST 800-171. And that's where I'd expect a class variance. One other thing that kind of supports this is back in 2017, specifically in DFARS 252-204-7012, they gave you a very specific email address stating that if you couldn't achieve the NIST 800-171 requirements by that time, to let DoD know. And DoD, in fact, would take whatever action they thought was needed at that time, potentially even a class variance or something else that may have helped you. But as they say, that was 2017, and that ship has likely sailed. So I wouldn't bet the house on it.
Great, thanks. Hey, we're just a little bit over our time. One last question, give you the opportunity to make that famous statement again. What can we expect moving forward as it relates to the CMMC timeline? What should OSCs be conscious of?
Absolutely. So if you haven't already started, you are too late, but that doesn't mean that it's the end. Review your contracts, put together a business case, get your budget secured for next year, and get moving. I gave you some items that you should be doing immediately. You can do those before your budget's approved for next year. And in fact, it may help you build that business case before the year is out. Be mindful of one last couple of other items. You're not the only ones looking for certification. There's a limited amount of people who can actually prepare you for your assessment. And also there's a limited amount of people performing assessments. So if you haven't already, your competitors may already have achieved their compliance or they're already on those waiting lists for the C3POs to get assessments when they've actually completed it.
Fantastic. Justin, thanks for all this. Let me just sort of summarize the 4 or 5 points you made. The proposed rule the proposed rule is now with the Office of Information Regulatory Affairs. Timeline is essentially the same. Don't count on a variance. And if you haven't started yet, you're late. And the last point you just made, I think can be summarized easy by saying, there may not be enough lifeboats for everybody that needs one. Anything else to add, Justin, before we check out?
No, thank you for the opportunity to talk with everybody about this. And I'm glad I know what we're talking about now. So that's awesome.
Fantastic. So if anybody needs more information, we're going to be sending out an email to those attendees with some details on what we talked about today. Other than that, our website is full of blogs and webinars like this. We try to keep them short. And then, of course, we're always open to calls. We are go-givers. Justin and I love to talk shop, especially compliance, more specifically CMMC. So always happy to talk. Thanks, folks, for viewing. Thanks, Justin, for sharing your expertise. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, Carl.